Rob Rose gets his teeth into very interesting subjects from time to time, and he's just done that now. He's the editor in chief of the FM group, which includes currency news. And Rob has put a piece together on the Competition Tribunal that will send shivers down the spine of any rational South African businessman. We'll tell you why. Rob, I suppose I should have said business person, of course, because yay for the girls. They are really taking a very leading role when it comes to South African business. But what a story. Now, I can imagine that there'll be some young journalists or some students at Rhodes saying, but where does he get these amazing pieces from? Where do they fall out of the sky?
Well, Alec, I mean, that's interesting. I think that, once you've been around this business for long enough, as you and I have been, you have people who are involved in various parts of the economy who call you and say, I've just seen this thing and it's outrageous. And I think that the world should know about this. And that's, this particular story and many other stories happen like that. I think it's, we as journalists often miss what's happening on the ground. And I think that that's why it's very vital that you have a community of people who are in the business sector who can call you up and say, "I think we need to really give this some serious airtime," and that's what happened in this particular case.
Well, it is a sometimes forgotten science of journalism, which is it's all about connections. It's all about your contacts, isn't it? You work your contact book and you, over the years, reap the fruits.
Yeah, I mean, Alec, as obviously as somebody who's been around for ages, I think that a lot of contacts in various sectors in the economy and society want to trust that you'll do a good job as well. If they say to you, "There's a story that I think needs to be really explored in depth," or "This thing has happened and it's really outrageous or unfair to one particular part of society," they want to think that you'll do a good job and be pretty fair about it. I think if you just chase tabloid style headlines and you just want a quick hit tabloid piece, then I think that people are going to think you're not going to do a justifiable job. You're not going to dig in depth into a specific issue. And ultimately, those kind of stories just fail to land because you haven't really treated it with the seriousness it demands. And I think I think you see the best journalists out there, the guys who do really well, kind of Amar Bogani, those guys will really dig into a story and explore it in depth. And I think that's what we need to do with so many huge faults in our society that need to be remedied. We can't just, move from one scandal to the next and oh, this happened and too bad. You got to like really explore those fault lines and see how they can be fixed.
Mm. Reading through this piece, I wondered what David Lewis, who was the quite prestigious and quite highly regarded member of the Competition Tribunal for many years and the chairman for a long time, he wrote that excellent book called Dinners, what was it, Thieves at the Dinner Table, where he explained his time there. Wonder what he would have made of all of this. But I'm running ahead of myself. Give us the story in a nutshell so that we can then go into a little more depth.
Sure. Well, I suppose the context is that the competition authorities were there to, set up in sort of the late 1990s to ensure that the market operated efficiently and that, market failures were prevented, and there was essentially fair business taking place. I mean, that was the whole point of it. So if there were sort of, cartels that existed where people were fixing prices and starving smaller companies out of society, then they were dealt with, and there were rules in place and penalties for that kind of thing. But I think what has happened in recent times is that the competition authorities have acted as kind of introduced more sand into the system. They've blocked business from doing deals. We saw 15 years ago, you'll remember the case of Harmony, Bernard Swanepoel's company trying to buy goldfields. And ultimately, that was an offer that was never heard by the shareholders because it just got stymied and stuck at the competition tribunal. So an offer made to shareholders saying, I know it's a hostile offer and would you like to take our offer and Harmony controls Goldfields? It never actually got to the shareholders because of the holdup at the tribunal. So you see the tribunal and the competition authorities acting as kind of molasses in the system and just slowing things down, which means that genuine economic opportunities just go missing because they haven't been heard. So this particular case related to a cartel hearing relating to scrap metal, which dated back to the early 2000s, and a couple of members of the steel industry, ArcelorMittal, Columbus Steel, and SCORE, essentially said, "Okay, we're part of a buyers cartel. We created this buyers cartel to fix the price of scrap metal." This other company who is the subject of this particular appeal, Cape Gate, said, actually, we weren't part of the cartel. We don't think this is fair and we're not going to plead guilty to this. So the competition authorities investigated this and referred this to the tribunal back in, more than a decade ago. Eventually in 2019, there's a case that's heard against Cape Gate. Now, they hear the case in 2019, and it takes 6 years for this case to ever get a decision. Eventually, they come back, the Competition Tribunal, after 6 years, and says essentially that Cape Gate is guilty of this prohibited conduct. So Cape Gate, being this company that operates in the system, says we can't wait 6 years for this. This must go to the Competition Appeal Court. We can't have a situation where you're preventing us from finalizing deals and stopping doing business for 6 years, and this deal should be overturned. Now, what happened last week is the Competition Appeal Court came back and said, this is just, this delay is just completely unacceptable. It's egregious. You are kind of holding up the system. We can't let this kind of thing happen. And more than that, it kind of raised ethical questions because when asked about this delay, the chairman of the tribunal, the chair of the tribunal, said, no, 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 this was because of COVID and various other things. But the actual tribunal panel members who decided on it said, well, no, it's because we thought settlement discussions were underway. So the appeal court says not only has there been an egregious and unconstitutional delay in this kind of thing happening, but there's now kind of ethical questions over this. So I think it casts a big cloud over the functioning of our competition authorities, and it's the kind of thing that the minister, who should already be looking at the functioning of the competition authorities, should really consider. I mean, there needs to be a complete overhaul for this to be actually bolstering our economy rather than holding it back.
It's so interesting when you have a look at the comparisons globally. In the United States, you have a president who wants to wipe away anything to do with competition uh, restraints on or antitrust kind of options that stop big companies from being able to perhaps prey on the consumers. In South Africa, it's gone completely the other way. So it wants to have these two sides of the spectrum. But getting back to David Lewis, did you have? I know you were around when he was the chair. Did you have a similar view to the one I had that he'd actually done a good job?
Yeah, he was fantastic. I thought David Lewis was great when he was at the tribunal, and I knew him quite well when he was a corruption watch afterwards. I think David had a strong ethical sense of the role that business could play. I mean, he was an economist essentially at the outset. So he approached it from a kind of a pragmatic economic point of view, which was very useful. Um, Having said that, I mean, he was at the tribunal when the Harmony Goldfields things went down, and there are certain structural issues that I don't think have ever been resolved. But David Lewis was practical, pragmatic. He would make sure that cases like this, I don't think would have happened under his watch.
Certainly wouldn't have taken as long as it had. And the wording from the judges, it seems unusual.
In this particular case, I mean, it was very clear they wanted to send a very strong message. I mean, they said that we cannot. This is completely unconscionable. They described it as offensive to the Constitution, which is not the kind of language you normally hear from judges in an appeal authority like this. They said that the delay is so egregious it cannot be deprecated strongly enough. It is incontestable that the delay of 6 years amounts to a serious dereliction of duty, warranting censure. And I think, Alec, what was important to this as well is that they said these administrative bodies that are part of our administrative system can't spend this long on anything. And I think it's not just the constitutional authority, the competition authorities that should take note of this. I think it's all our administrative bodies that tend to take far too long deciding this. You tend to see even cases at the financial regulator, the FSCA. I mean, some of those take a very long time. I obviously don't need to mention our courts and what happens with the NPA.
Have they ever said, have you ever questioned anybody and said, why is it taking you so long? What is the holdup?
Well, when I have these interactions with various members of these bodies, and I think of the FSCA, and obviously I've spoken a lot to prosecutors involved in white collar crime, you know, the answer is always that it's very complicated, and businesses always lawyer up, and they have to have 10 advocates in a room who will always introduce more sand into the system to make it last longer. But I mean, I tend to think that is often an excuse. If you look at the case of, say, Steinhoff, Startup happened in 2017, and some of those things for which Marcus Jooste could have been charged, the SMS he sent, which was clear insider trading, telling his friends to sell their shares. Now, the prosecutors had that within a year of Startup collapsing. And it took them, till 2024, 2023 to actually charge Marcus Jooste on the most blatant case of insider trading ever. So I think it's unnecessary hesitancy. And I think that our government controlled bodies, there's a lack of confidence based on the fact that they don't have the skills and they just don't have the manpower. So they're very wary. They approach these things very carefully because, as you've seen in the case involving the Guptas, those cases fall apart and you get castigated publicly for it if you're a public official, which I suppose you should be. But it just is. These are, it's preventing our economy from working in any fundamental way that's good for anyone.
Healthcare matters, but what matters most?
Having cover for the people who keep this business going.
Bonitas is there for you when it counts. Bonitas, medical aid for South Africa. Visit bonitas.co.za and find your plan.
A competition authority, though, is so critical it's so central to the working of an economy. And in this case, one of the things that shook me was that there were members of the panel who outright lied to the court, said that, well, the reason why it was delayed, as you mentioned a moment ago, was because they were busy with settlement negotiations, which Cape Gate says was never the case.
Yes, I mean that's the thing for which they get completely castigated. I mean that's why the Competition Appeal Court judges say this is just outrageous. I mean they essentially say they use the words falsehoods as opposed to outright lies, but it's essentially the same thing. And it's just I mean it's unbelievable that there's two contrasting views on this. Either they just didn't know what was going on, or they're outright lying. But I think that to have appeal court panel judges saying this is deeply alarming. I mean, even the minority judgment in this particular case, in the long ruling, illustrated not an I wouldn't say aversion to the facts, but certainly a way of looking at it that was deeply troubling for somebody who's the final word on competition cases. So I think it does illustrate the need for new capacity, certainly at this particular panel, and in the authorities more widely.
It's very diplomatic, new capacity. I've been looking at the Joburg budgets that are now accessible, and those guys haven't got a clue what's going on. They have a shortfall of, just for maintenance, of 220 billion. I know you guys have done a lot of work on it, and they've budgeted 8 billion. It's like people who haven't got a clue and yet have been promoted into these positions, being paid very handsomely for them, and causing chaos as they go along. Reading through your story, I got the feeling that maybe some of the members, if not all of the members on the Competition Tribunal panel, are in the same position.
Yeah, I mean, people have left the panel. I mean, in one case, what they did is they let the essentially the equivalent of an administrative clerk draw up the ruling and blamed that person when things didn't happen. I mean, there's a real sense of a lack of responsibility and accountability for what happens in this particular case. This isn't just one isolated case, as you say. I mean, you look at the case involving the banks. Now, the Competition Commission tried to investigate the banks for rigging the rand and various other things. And this isn't a case that came to the Competition Commission alone. This was based upon the US case, which involved Barclays and a lot of these bigger banks. And they got much of the evidence from overseas. Yet that case is still going on. I mean, the Competition Commission tried to throw the book at every single bank operating in the country and messed it up badly. They were then, some of the banks were then excused, and the finding was that essentially they should never have charged some of the banks. So it does demonstrate a complete, I suppose, disjuncture for what they're meant to be doing. I mean, a lack of appreciation for the fact that this is an economic job meant to improve the economy, not meant to just hold things up. And the desire to charge all the banks in that particular case and not resolve this after many years is just as alarming as the Cape Gate case. I mean, there's so many instances where this is just not working.
So there are lots that are wrong with the South African economy and with the structure of South African economy. But if you were to give one thing that you could change with a magic wand, you mentioned capacity. Would that be it? Would it be actually putting the right people into these very powerful positions?
I mean, I do think absolutely talent is critical, especially in municipalities and a lot of these institutions. But I also think, I mean, Alec, just more widely, I think that there's a lack of, South Africa's a very polite country. We don't want to confront people necessarily. I think our inability to fire people when they get things wrong is a scourge you see right from the smallest company all the way to Parliament and President Ramaphosa's cabinets. People get shuffled away and somebody else is appointed to the same job. City of Joburg is exactly that. The proposal is to hire more people, 40,000 people to the city of Joburg to fix something that 34,000 people couldn't fix. The solution isn't to hire more people. The solution is to get better results from the people you have already. So I think that like an appreciation of the fact that you need to confront these issues is something that would make a big difference in all the municipalities. The wrong people should just be fired. And the traditional response has been, well, it's very difficult to fire somebody in this country. I don't think that's true. If there's merit, you can absolutely fire people. It's the fact that a lot of managers are utterly gutless and don't want to have this fight. I think that's what gets us in this trouble.
Let's go back to the Competition Tribunal and your takeaways from this very extended case. Apart from the fact that lawyers probably have it, they've been well fed over a lengthy period of time. What's your main takeaway, though?
I mean, Alec, you mentioned David Lewis, and I think that era is one in which I spent a lot of time at the tribunal and the Competition Commission, and there were some very important cases. There was the bread fixing case. There were some very important cases that I think needed to be heard. But equally, that was a different time at the tribunal. You tended to trust in the rulings. You tended to believe that there was validity to it, and I think that the sense that the authority is performing in a way that is at all solid and won't be impeached at the next, if you appeal this to a high court or a constitutional court, isn't there anymore. So I think a lack of trust in this particular institution is depleting, is adding to the kind of the cloud over our corporate sector. Already people don't want to invest in the country for numerous reasons. And you don't want the fact that the Competition Commission will unnecessarily hold things up to be another thing. We had a bizarre case a few years ago where I think the Black empowerment shareholders of Burger King wanted to sell their shareholding in Burger King, and they weren't allowed to. The authorities just said you can't sell the shares, and then eventually that was overturned. But to think that you can't sell your shares as a Black empowerment shareholder, what is that doing? I mean, you're just basically introducing another blockage in the economy. So I think that for me, the takeaway is that the competition authorities, the people there at the moment, don't appreciate the wider social context and the need to have real economic growth and jobs in the country. That's the big imperative. And I don't feel that the people there at the moment are connected to that imperative.
In uncertain times, good information is priceless. The Biz News Conference is heading back to the Drakensberg. Join me, Alec Hogg, from the 11th to the 14th of August for BNC 9. Champagne Sports Resort, where it all began and where our community gathers for honest conversations, smart investing insights, and direct access to some of South Africa's sharpest minds. Come and rub shoulders with the best we've got. 28 keynote speakers, 3 days. Seats are available now. Book your seat by clicking the link in the description. Start your day a step ahead. Biz News Insider. It delivers the business stories that matter every morning straight to your inbox, sharp, fast, and free. Subscribe now. Rob Rose is the editor-in-chief of the Financial Mail Group. I'm Alec Hogg from biznews.com.